Team Trudeau descends on D.C. as the clock ticks down to the next tariff deadline. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
The answers you need
from the people in the know.
This is Now You Know with Rob Snow on News Radio.
I'm David Smith, filling in for Rob Snow today, Thursday. 27 days to go until the next deadline on U.S. tariffs. Still no word from the Trudeau government on who will be Canada's fentanyl czar, the new position created on Monday that seemed to save us from the first tariff deadline. The Prime Minister is in Ottawa today giving remarks to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Big City Mayors Caucus. There will be a photo op. He will not take any questions. And he has no other events on his itinerary today. Meanwhile, other members of Team Trudeau have descended on Washington, D.C. once again, doing their level best to figure out who to talk to get this tariff threat to go away. Energy and Natural Resources Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne, and Defense Minister Bill Blair are all in the U.S. Capitol this week, making the case that Canada should not be dragged into a trade war. They're meeting with senators and with congresspeople, and they were reportedly, quote, looking to hold meetings with newly appointed members of Trump's team. I can't tell you if they actually have any meetings. All that's been reported is that they are looking to have meetings. We'll keep you abreast of that situation as it evolves during the course of today's show. On the tariff file, a key player in Trump's administration faces his first confirmation hearing today. The man's name is Jason Greer, and he will play a role in Canada's fate when it comes time for a possible trade war with the U.S. Greer is Trump's pick for U.S. trade representative, the point man on all things tariff and trade for the next 4 years, if he is confirmed. Now, Greer is no stranger to Trump's trade policy. He was chief of staff to Trump's previous trade representative, Robert Lighthizer, during the last round of trade negotiations during Trump's first term. This morning in Washington, D.C., at this hearing, Greer was asked about his philosophy on the use of tariffs as part of America's trade policy.
I think it's indeed instructive to think about our history with respect to trade policy. As many on this committee likely realize, until about 1913, the United States government was almost entirely funded from tariff revenues, including during the latter part of the 19th century when America truly was exploding as an international industrial powerhouse. And we had a relatively high tariff rate. At the same time, we saw countries like the United Kingdom lowering their tariff rates and actually falling out of industrial competitiveness. I would say also you have instances in the past where when we have seen what happens when the reverse happens. For example, when we gave China permanent market access to the United States.
Jason Greer. Remember that name. If he is confirmed, he will be the next United States trade representative. In other news, Pierre Poilievre is putting forward his vision for cracking down on the scourge of fentanyl in this country. The Conservative leader announced if he becomes prime minister, he will bring in life sentences for people caught trafficking the deadly drug.
We must stop drugs to save our people and put Canada first. It starts with locking up mass traffickers and manufacturers of this poison with penalties that fit the crime. But what is that crime? Let's call fentanyl trafficking what it is. Mass murder. Selling 40 milligrams of this poison is enough to kill 20 people. It's like spraying bullets into a crowd. You might not know who you're killing, but it's certain someone will die. That's why I'm denouncing today, as part of my Canada First plan, that common sense Conservatives will bring mandatory prison sentences. There will be life sentences for anyone caught trafficking, producing, or exporting over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. 40 milligrams is enough to kill 20 people. Anyone who is involved in trafficking that amount of fentanyl will get a life sentence. We will lock them up and we will throw away the key.
And Poilievre says, regardless of Trump's threats, it's time for governments in Canada to take drastic measures on the drug crisis.
But whether or not we agree with him should not matter. It should not take a foreign leader to get the Liberals to wake up to the drug crisis that they have caused here at home. It should have been enough that we lost 50,000 of our people. We should crack down on drugs, not to please President Trump, but to ensure that not one more mother has to bury her face in her hands on learning that her son died of an overdose in a back alley somewhere. We must stop drugs to save our people and put Canada first.
Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is in Montreal today. He is promoting the NDP's vision for Canada's strategy to counter Trump's tariffs. It's a protectionist message, buy Canadian, while putting workers first and with more government spending on the social safety net.
One of the things we need is a better EI that better protects workers in this time of uncertainty where workers might lose their job. We need to make sure that there's protection in place for them. But beyond that, we also need to have an approach that makes us stronger, makes us more resilient. And so we need to look at a couple of changes, important changes. What we would do is change our procurement rules. We need to make sure that if we're spending public money, any public money, that it goes towards Canadian companies, Canadian contracts that hire Canadian workers, particularly unionized workers who are well paid. This is very important. If we spend our public money, it should go to Canadian workers, Canadian jobs, unionized jobs. We also have a lot of infrastructure projects. In those infrastructure projects, we need to require Canadian content. Thinking about steel and aluminum, we make it in Canada. Let us ensure that when we build, we're using Canadian content.
Singh says these are things the Trudeau government can be doing right now, even with the House of Commons prorogued. MPs are not due back in Ottawa until March 24th. The Liberals pick their new leader on March 9th. Trump's next tariff deadline is in 27 days, on March 5th. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. Coming up next, our weekly conversation with syndicated columnist Michael Taube. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
There is no question Rob won't get answered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow continues
on News Radio.
David Smith here, in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Joining me now, as he does at this time every week, is Michael Taube, syndicated columnist with Troy Media, Looney Politics, former speechwriter for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Hello, Michael. Welcome back. Can we put Michael on the air, please? Sorry about this, folks. Little technical difficulty in the studio. Michael, are you there?
I am still here. Are you there?
I'm good. I'm good, Michael. How are you?
No problem. I'm doing well. Hope you're doing well, too.
Excellent. So in the National Post today, you have a column highlighting Doug Ford's success in winning endorsements from large labor unions during his time in office. Of course, Ontario's in an election campaign. The current campaign is built around, for Doug Ford at least, the economy, countering Trump's tariff threats. So obviously Ford's strength with the private sector unions is a big plus for him this go around. Why do you think Ford's been so successful with organized labor?
Well, this is the second time in a number of years I've discussed it, and others have too. But I think the way I look at it, which is a bit different than others, is the fact that most people look at it more in the present, that Doug Ford has built these relationships that, as I point out in my column, this now happened in 2 consecutive elections. And generally speaking, his media commentators, his critics and others often just say, well, it's small. What does it make a difference? Only a handful of unions have supported Doug Ford in the Ontario PCs, both in 2022 and now. It's obviously not a major switch or a major turn. It's not a major shift in policy direction, philosophical thinking, and what have you. But the end result is, David, and I think a lot of people do miss this, is that Doug Ford, unlike most right-leaning politicians, no matter who they are or where they're based, he's doing something that historically conservatives were able to do in other countries that I listed. But in more recent times, let's say since the days of Ronald Reagan becoming U.S. president, so it's the 1980s, for the past 40 to 50 years, it's been extremely difficult for conservatives to make headway. It's not surprising when you consider the fact that obviously the free market thinking, the right-leaning politics, the ideas and concepts that we have that the private sector is more important than the public sector as a general rule of thumb, obviously makes it difficult to build relationships or build ties with labor unions. But Doug Ford is sort of a throwback to decades ago, because one of the things he's always done, and I've talked about this before, is that he has a whole assortment of things that are part of his philosophy, which has been sort of called Ford Nation, which is small c conservatism, populism, and retail politics. He's able to meld those things quite readily. But what has also been quite interesting is not only is he able to meld it, he's also able to use it to build political bridges with those who would not naturally support him, naturally support his party, or even just naturally support conservatism. And in this case, we're talking about labor unions. Now, 2 labor unions have come out in 2025 to support him, including, for the first time ever, a labor union in Brampton, Ontario, associated with Unifor, which would be impossible to even consider even just a few years ago. He's also had the support of one of the strands of the IBEW for the electrical workers, and he's had that now for 2 consecutive elections. And the way he's able to do it is he's always been able to take a whole series of ideas and concepts from supporting, private sector initiatives, supporting the free market, to all the way down, if you listen to his language, fighting for the little people, ensuring that tax dollars and, that we spend things more prudently, that more tax dollars are saved, that people are hurting. This sort of mentality and this sort of concept, sure, you occasionally hear conservative leaders say and do, but in the case of Doug Ford, what has been quite incredible is that not only he's able to do it, he's actually able to build relationships and maintain them, as he did with union leaders that people would be familiar with, or the listeners would be familiar with here. Smokey Thomas of OPSU, Gary Dias, who used to be a prominent union leader but has since retired. Both of them actually have retired, but he's able to continue to build those relationships because union leaders realize that when they deal with someone like a Doug Ford as Ontario Premier, they actually do have a seat at the table and that he actually will listen. And again, it's not an act. It's not him making himself over for the press. This is really him. This is the man I met decades ago, and this is what he represents, and he's always represented it. And more importantly, his family has always represented it too. It's a part of Ford Nation that, yes, it's important for white-collar workers, business leaders, and others to be part of a small c conservative movement, but that blue-collar workers are extremely important and should have a seat at the table, too.
Yeah, very interesting thoughts. Encourage the listeners to check out that column in the National Post today. Organized labor and conservative movements are not mutually exclusive, people. They can go hand in hand to a great deal of success, as is the case with the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. Okay, we have to stop here for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk federal politics with Pierre Poilievre, trying to elbow his way into the news cycle with all of the oxygen going to Donald Trump these days. That's just ahead. I'm here with Michael Taube. I'm David Smith. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
You have questions.
Now You Know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
David Smith here in for Rob Snow today, back with Michael Taube, syndicated columnist, former speechwriter for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. So, Michael, in the last 2 weeks, the Trump tariff story obviously sucked up all of the oxygen in the political news cycle. Pierre Poilievre has been very active on that file this week, pitching his own plan for the border, for cracking down on fentanyl, calling for the resumption of Parliament. I'd like to get your thoughts. How do you think he is handling this situation as opposition leader? It's a tricky act that he has to do here.
It most certainly is. He also had a video as well talking about the benefits of interprovincial trade, which is something you don't see or hear very often, and that obviously got a good reception too. But Poilievre has been a master, not just in terms of promotion, self-promotion, in other words, but also bringing out videos that intrigue and interest social media users and otherwise. But as opposition leader, no, I think he's been doing an extremely good job. You know, in one sense, you can make the argument that, well, this is what an opposition leader is supposed to do. He or she is supposed to oppose, to bring an opposing point of view, to bring other ideas or concepts that are either contrary or different than what the government of the day represents. So in that case, obviously, or in that instance, he's doing everything properly. But just in terms of sort of catching on to different ideas and styles, I think he's handled it extremely well. And it's not surprising. This is why he's been doing well since he became federal conservative leader in 2022 and why he's been leading in the polls for the better part of 2+ years, we're closing in on 3 and in double digits in most polls for well over a year, because he's catching on to issues that, yes, are part of the general topic, which includes, Trump and tariffs, but he's also presenting ideas and concepts that the federal government is not presenting. You mentioned one of them as well, cracking down on fentanyl. That has been one of U.S. President Donald Trump's 2 main concerns: illegal migrants and illicit drugs like fentanyl. So he tackled it, and he tackled it properly, basically stating that, that anyone who's caught dealing it will get life in prison. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should have been handled in the first place. It's kind of sad, the city I live in Toronto, and I think Rob and I talked about this in the past, David, but I may be mistaken. At one point they were actually thinking of legalizing fentanyl in this city. I mean, it sounds preposterous on the surface, but it was actually considered, or at least it was recommended as a possibility. In the end, ultimately, City Council turned it down, thank goodness, but it's hard to believe that it even came up as a possibility at that point. I think that Poilievre has handled that properly. I think that he's also his plan for, his own plan for the border. I think he handled that properly too, because it's different than the way Justin Trudeau or Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberals have handled it, which is to say they haven't handled it properly. Liberal MPs, Liberal cabinet ministers have come on the shows for years saying how, things are being taken care of and that border security and border safety are extremely important. Yeah, they are now, but less so for the last 9+ years. They're catching up now, 1, because Trump has made it an issue, and 2, because their goose is cooked politically, so they're trying to save their political hides and as many seats as they possibly can, knowing full well that no matter who becomes the next Liberal leader and Prime Minister, at this rate it's going to be Mark Carney, it appears, it doesn't make a difference because they're so far behind the polls, and it's basically just going to be a new political leader with an old veneer, which is still the same thing. It's not going to be much different. So Poilievre's done it properly, and he's doing it very well, and that's why, with the exception of one polling company, he's holding a big lead. I mean, yes, it's a little lower than it was when Trudeau was still firmly ensconced in power, but that was to be expected. Everything is working properly because Poilievre is handling it properly. And I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, great points as always, Michael. And we're running right into the break here, so we'll have to leave it there for this week. Thank you so much for your time as always. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
That is Michael Taube, syndicated columnist. We're lucky enough to have him on this show every week at this time. I'm David Smith. Still ahead, the Newsday panel. This is Now You Know on News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now You Know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio. The Newsday panel.
David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. It's the Newsday panel. On the line, we have Jordan Paquette, senior consultant with Blue Sky Strategy Group, all the way from PEI today. Jordan, hello.
Hey, David. Here in God's country today. How are things in Ottawa?
Things in Ottawa are snowy and cold. How are things on the island?
They're just cold.
Okay.
Cold but sunny.
Okay. Cam Holmstrom is here too, principal, Nipaway Strategies. Hello, Cam.
Hello there.
Where are you today?
I am down on the St. Lawrence Valley, down in Brockville. A little snowy here today and a little cold, but it is February.
Yeah, it is February, no matter where you are in the country. Okay. How is Pierre Poilievre doing at staking out territory on the Trump tariff file? This is developing in a very interesting way politically. In the first 2 weeks or so after Trump's inauguration, Poilievre was fairly quiet, staying in the background of the news cycle. But in the last 4 days, he's really ramped things up. He's had 3 press conferences in 4 days, and he's grabbed headlines yesterday's with his pitch to give life sentences to people caught trafficking fentanyl. What do you think he's responding to, and is he putting the right messages out there? I'll start with you, Jordan.
Yeah, so Canadians are looking for solutions right now in light of the Trump threats. And I mean, Poilievre has been putting things in the window for the last couple of years, sort of talking about a number of these issues, breaking down interprovincial trade barriers, getting tough on drugs, crime, all those types of things. So now when you're looking at it, there's a bit, people presume there'd be some type of vacuum in the Liberal leadership race. Mark Carney would be out there talking lots of policy, what he's going to do when he comes in as prime minister. But we're not really seeing a ton of that. We're seeing him just going around hunting for Liberal votes. So I mean, there is a bit of an absence right now at the national stage. So I mean, now is a great opportunity for Pierre to go out there, fill some of that void, and start talking about some of these policies. I think fentanyl now is certainly top of mind for many Canadians, especially in light of these threats. I think this has shone the light on it quite a bit more. But again, like Conservatives have been talking about this for a while. I remember back in 2019, traveling with Andrew Scheer to Vancouver, making an announcement in front of the port saying we have to do something about the illegal fentanyl coming in here and guns and gang crime and whatnot. So I think he's still talking to a broader sense of what the Canadian public likes to see on these issues, and they want action, they want solutions, and I think that's what he's putting forward right now.
Okay, Cam, what do you make of the time we saw very little of Pierre Poilievre, and then all of a sudden we're seeing a whole lot of him this week? It's a tough situation, for opposition parties. So much of the Trump tariff story is government-centric. Opposition parties can't do anything but make their own suggestions. So what do you think Pierre Poilievre's responding to here? Why are we seeing so much of him this week?
Well, first off, I don't think him having been quiet in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration was necessarily a bad thing for either him or anyone else in the matter. And don't mean that as an insult. I mean that as a fact of we were automatically under threat right away. So unless you were going to say something different than falling in line, then I think that, you were probably better to say little. And I think inside the Conservative coalition, you've kind of seen that right there. While most of the Conservative coalition is pulling in the same direction, I can point to a Doug Ford or a Tim Houston, even a Scott Moe. But others, like Danielle Smith, have kind of gone off in their own direction, right? And that does create its own tension within that coalition, I can just imagine, especially within that caucus. So if you're Mr. Poilievre, do you put a statement out there that maybe roils some people inside your caucus, or do you just kind of lay low? Not the worst thing to ever done. The one thing I'll notice, though, I'll point out, though, is that what's happened over the last 2 weeks is that Mr. Poilievre's entire campaign and political raison d'etre has been blown up, right? This ain't going to be about a carbon tax anymore. As much as he may want it to be, he's not. So so you had to sit here and figure out another message, another way forward, another way to be able to talk about things. Where I think where Mr. Poilievre falls short this week is that this isn't a new idea. These aren't new ideas. It's how do I shoehorn my existing ideas into the current moment rather than rise to the current moment. And as I saw somebody put on Facebook this morning, I just love it. It was a beautiful, beautiful quote. Is that Mr. Poilievre has found his new verb the noun slogan. That's essentially what it is. A verb, slapping a noun, off you go, right? And to me, the fact that, you can talk about trying to throw people in jail over drugs and how that has not worked stateside, and it's not likely to work anymore here, but at the very least you can say it's something. And the last thing I'll say is that I think for Mr. Poilievre, he has to be more propositional going forward now because the race has tightened up. Things are like you saw the poll coming out of Quebec this morning, some of the polling's coming out of Ontario federally. You know what? The Liberals are, whether you like it or not, are back in the game with Mark Carney, and it looks very different now. He can't be the attack dog. He actually has to be propositional. He has to show that, hey, I'm here to find some solutions, and here are my thoughts. He can't coast anymore. So that could be good for him in the end. But yeah, it's a lot to be thrown at any leader at this point to try to resort this all out after having 18 months of free runway.
Yeah, Jordan, do you agree with that? Being more propositional, positioning himself as the prime minister in waiting moving forward?
Sure, and I mean, in fairness, he has put out a number of policy ideas over the last number of years. I mean, it hasn't just been the carbon tax, but at the same time, Poilievre can't let the Liberals run from their record. They're going to do everything they can, the Liberals, to try and say, Carney's a new guy, he's an outsider, he's here. Well, he was chairing the Prime Minister's Economic Task Force, Trudeau's Economic Task Force, for the last number of years as well. And there's tons of clips out there from his time in Europe talking about carbon taxes, how we need to have higher prices on carbon. Even just, I was watching, he did an interview with CTV Atlantic saying, oh yeah, we'll put a bunch of tax in the industry and those costs aren't going to be passed on to consumers. I mean, that's certainly not going to happen in reality, and I think he was really called out for it. So Poilievre is tapping into some of this Canada First mentality. He's been talking about that for a while, and people used to criticize him for it, say like, oh, this Canada First, that sounds so Trump-like. Well, now Canadians are looking towards leaders to say, how are you going to put our country first? How are you going to reduce these economic trade barriers in our own country that the Liberals have put on? Liberals have put on anti-development policies, high tax policies over the last number of years, and those are the people that Poilievre is talking to move on. So I think he's going to continue on with that message and keep Carney trying to keep Carney tied onto it, as they should.
Very interesting. Cam, anything to add to that?
I would just point out where Mr. Poilievre and the Conservatives are likely to run foul, and I think it's knowing them well enough and what they have gone about this. The more you talk about the Liberals and the less you talk about Donald Trump, the more you're misreading the moment. It has to be about him. It has to be about the guy down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and what he's doing, because that's what's pushing things along right now. You can sit here and tell me all day long about Justin Trudeau's record and all that and yada, yada, yada. It has nothing to do with what we're facing at this exact moment. And honestly, it makes you look more offside, because even when the likes of Doug Ford, Tim Houston, Francois Legault, even Scott Moe are putting this all aside and saying, what can we do to deal with this right now, and leaving the partisanship over there, the more you stand out from that, the more you're looking more offside of Canadians. Yes, Canadians want solutions, and I think there's actually a moment here where you can actually get a lot of things done. And if you're being cooperative and being propositional and not being that attack dog that he typically is, there's something there for Mr. Poilievre. But I would just point out, and I've said it on this show for the longest time, Mr. Poilievre has continued to show he only has one gear. He's had all these opportunities when he had a 25-point lead in the polls to show himself to be more magnanimous, more propositional, less the attack dog, more the statesman. He has passed up every opportunity at this point to do it. So to do it now, it's going to be hard, and B, it may not look as genuine to people because of what it's at. But we'll see. You know what? To me, that's the lesser of the concerns. The bigger concern has to be on Trump. And if any second you take away from that is a second that you're not helping the rest of the country. And I think that the voters will eventually make you pay for that.
Yeah, that seems to be reflected in Poilievre's actions this week. Okay, very interesting. We have to stop. Little overtime. We'll be back. We'll talk about cooperation and Parliament and the situation with prorogation. That's coming up next. It's the Newsday panel. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. This is News Radio.
Critical thinking is not dead.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
David Smith here, in for Rob today. On our Newsday panel, Jordan Paquette is here with Blue Sky Strategy Group, Cam Holmstrom with Nepoe Strategies. So we now have both main opposition parties, Conservatives and the NDP, calling on Trudeau to reconvene Parliament to debate the Trump tariff threat and Canada's countermeasures. Cam, I'll start with you. Do you think that would be best for the country? What are some of the political risks? And ultimately, how realistic do you think it is that we might see MPs back in the House before March 24th?
Well, I'll take the second part first. I don't think it's very realistic that's going to happen. Do I think it should happen? Honestly, it depends on what you're going to do with it. If it's going to be what it was before the House left, if it's going to be an exercise of literally have a throne speech, take the whole government down and throw everyone into an election, I don't think that does any good. But there's something to be said for the House sitting because of the fact that, yeah, you know what? This is an ever-evolving threat of what's going on around us. Like, the government does not need Parliament to sit in order to move retaliatory tariffs. Government's got enough leeway on that. But if there are programs that are needed for supports for workers, like similar to what we saw around COVID, yeah, that's going to require the House to do it. You're going to absolutely have to have them sitting to do that. And in theory, you can do that without ever having to vote on the throne speech. But again, it all comes back down to where the opposition parties are at, and where is there actually a willingness to collaborate and work together and not send this into chaos? Because you know what? I would hope that we could rise to the moment and that everyone can kind of put it aside and be able to just go do that. But I'm not 100% convinced of that. The other thing I'll throw out there, too, is that let's just be real. This is more than just tariffs. This is more than what Global News had a great report today where they interviewed Steve Bannon, where he laid out exactly where he feels this is going. And then, yeah, it is conquest. That's what it is at the end of the day. And guess what? At some point, we need to have a parliament that's operating to deal with these huge existential matters.
At some point, I would agree with you, Cam. Jordan, I had Conservative Party House Leader Andrew Scheer on the show yesterday and asked him about that call to bring back Parliament. I asked him, would the purpose of that be so we can immediately go into an election? He didn't answer my hypothetical question, probably smart of him, but he didn't say, yes, we need the House back so we can have an election right now. He framed it as we need the House back because it would be best for the country to have Parliament sitting at this moment in time. What do you think?
Yeah, I tend to agree. Look, anytime there's an existential threat facing Canada, facing our economy, and frankly, just our way of life here, I think it is important that Parliament is in session. I mean, we can say yes, how partisan Parliament has been, how toxic some of the exchanges have been. Fine, but at the end of the day, that's democracy in Canada, and that's one of the things that we still have to protect, and we still have to do it. Now, do I think Parliament's going to come back before the end of March? No, I think if it was. I think if these tariffs did go through, I think there would have been much more of a pressure on the government to bring things back, to have these debates. But to that end, I mean, we have emergency debates in the House of Commons for much less of threats to our country, and those are the places where these exchanges and these ideas have to happen. It's one thing to say, like, let's all just come together and kind of find solutions. But I mean, we're at a government here that's a minority government nearing the end of its mandate. And now they're about to install a new prime minister who has only been elected by members of the Liberal Party. So at the end of the day, at some point soon, Canadians should have the opportunity to vote on this, have everybody put their plans forward, because this threat is not going away for the next 4 years. So let's have everybody get out there, put their plans out there, vote on it, and have somebody come in with a fresh mandate to actually deal with the crisis that we're facing.
Okay, we'll stop here. Very interesting. I'll just add this. I want to hammer this home for the listeners. The timeline here. Trump's next tariff deadline, March 5th. Liberals choose a new leader March 9th. Parliament's not due to be back for another 15 days on the 24th. That's what we're looking at in terms of the timeline of the House of Commons actually coming back and sitting in this country. When we come back, we'll talk about patriotism. New research from the Angus Reid Institute finds that Canadians are feeling more pride in our country than we did before this Trump tariff threat. Funny how a national crisis brings us all together like that. Is there an opportunity for political parties to exploit those feelings? We'll get into that when we come back. I'm David Smith. This is the Newsday panel. You're listening to News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. It's our Newsday panel. Cam Holmstrom is here with Nipaway Strategies and Jordan Paquette from Blue Sky Strategy Group. In our final few minutes today, I'd like to ask you guys as political strategists about this new data from Angus Reid. 10-point boost in Canadian patriotism since this whole Trump tariff debacle started. More people than before are saying they are very proud to be Canadian. So that's nice. But in terms of politics, in your political strategist brains, and Jordan, I'll start with you, surely there's a way to exploit that for political gain. What would the strategy be there?
Sure. I think, look, when Canadians are proud of their identity and who they are, it's certainly, I think you find ways to appeal to that. And that's when these kind of Canada First type policies can certainly come into it, and people would be more open to it. Over the last, let's say decade or so, you had a prime minister talking about Canada being a post-national state. You've had people telling us we have to be ashamed of our history. Yes, there's things in our past we absolutely need to address and acknowledge and rectify. But looking at today and how the politics of it would work, this is when I think Canadians will be more adapt to. Let's do some more build in Canada strategies. Let's have people buy Canadian. Let's reduce these interprovincial trade barriers. So I think any policy that the political parties put forward based on those notions is likely to be a winner in the eyes of Canadians right now.
Cam, what do you think? I couldn't help but notice the NDP leader, Mr. Singh, this morning pitching Buy Canadian in his plan to respond to Trump's tariff threats, using Canadian steel and public work projects, things like that. Is that are they tapping into this surge in pride for Canada?
Well, to be fair to Jagmeet, that kind of stuff has been NDP policy since the NDP became the NDP. So it's not exactly a new idea from the NDP, if only for the fact we're now actually maybe highlighting it a bit. But what I would say is that I agree with Jordan in the sense that, if you're talking about things that are, support Canadian business, buy Canadian policies, all of that, that's very popular right now, and for good reason, right? At the end of the day, it's about coming together. And I think that, and where I differ with Jordan is that what I'm seeing in this moment, it's a patriotism that's forward-looking, not backward-looking. And I don't mean that in the sense of we ignore what's behind us, but it's focusing more on the idea of what unites us in this moment. So it's not having that discussion about the historical piece where I disagree with Jordan on some of this stuff, or talking about, what is our unifying identity, yada, 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 which I've always felt is not a real thing at this point because we're such a large, diverse country. But the point is, it's not focusing on that. It's looking about what us right now in this moment, right? And looking ahead of what brings us together. To me, that's a good thing because at the end of the day, really it's what's bringing everyone back to this. It's that old hierarchy of needs, right? Is that when your very sovereignty and existence as a nation is being threatened, it does push everything else off the ladder of importance, and that becomes the only thing. And the only way you can truly deal with that is to look ahead and look at where you're at right now, the next few steps ahead of you, not looking at the hundreds and hundreds behind you. So maybe that's a good thing in this moment. But I would argue, though, for anyone who's looking to play around with politically, is to be very careful. You know what? Right now, it's about authenticity, being who you are and looking ahead. If you're looking to kind of wedge issues back into this.
Yeah, I hear you. I got to cut you off. We're just right up against the hard out. Thank you so much, both of you guys. I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you.
Talk Back is next on News Radio.
It's time to talk back
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Should there be a special punishment for trafficking fentanyl? 1-833-668-2577. Pierre Poilievre says there should be. He says it should be life in prison. A life sentence, 25 years, for anyone caught trafficking fentanyl. Would that help with the drug crisis? 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today, and welcome to Talk Back. Our phone lines are open, 1-833-668-2577. We have 2 hours to take your calls and discuss the big issues of the day. And taking a break from Donald Trump and the tariff threat today to talk about something arguably just as serious, if not more. And that is fentanyl and the drug crisis. And the Trudeau government in Ottawa is suddenly seized with responding to the drug crisis with law enforcement. In response to Trump's tariff threats, the government's spending $200 million on drug trafficking enforcement and appointing a new fentanyl czar to coordinate those efforts. After years of emphasis on responding to the opioid epidemic as a public health crisis, with experimental policies in harm reduction, decriminalization, safe supply of pharmaceutical opioids, etc., this week the focus is now back on drug trafficking as an issue of criminal justice and law enforcement. I want to get into this with you today at 1-833-668-2577. And a jumping off point for the discussion is what Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre announced yesterday. Poilievre says we need tougher penalties, special penalties, for people trafficking in fentanyl. A life sentence. A mandatory life sentence for anyone caught trafficking in more than 40 milligrams of fentanyl. A deterrent against anyone making their money by manufacturing and selling this deadly drug. Opioid overdoses have killed 49,000 Canadians since 2016. And 9 out of 10 of those overdoses were due to fentanyl. It is so strong, so powerful, that for a new user, without a high tolerance, just 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be fatal. I see it every day. I live in downtown Ottawa. I first moved into the city in late 2019, just before the pandemic. I have watched the drug crisis explode in your nation's capital over the last 5 years. Today, it is impossible to walk around my neighborhood without seeing people using fentanyl. I live about 2 kilometers from Parliament Hill, and if I leave my home and I walk to the House of Commons, I will see somebody using fentanyl. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. Hundreds of people living on the street, stuck in the cycle of addiction and homelessness. And everywhere you see people using drugs. You see people selling drugs. It is common. It is out in the open. It is unaddressed. This is the reality today. This is not unique to Ottawa or to Ontario or to Canada. It is the same in cities and towns across North America. Since we have a federal leader pitching a new policy on fentanyl in the news today, I want to hear your opinions on what Mr. Poilievre is suggesting. Do you think a mandatory life sentence for trafficking fentanyl is a good idea? Do you support or oppose that policy proposal from the Conservative leader? 1-833-668-2577. Getting tough on drug traffickers to combat the drug crisis in Canada. 1-833-668-2577. Pierre Poilievre says people caught trafficking fentanyl should have a mandatory life sentence. Do you agree with that? In the press release sent out by the Conservatives yesterday, it says, and I quote, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre announced today that as Prime Minister, he will impose a mandatory life sentence on anyone involved in trafficking, production, and distribution of over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. End quote. He says, anyone. I have to assume that means for a first offense also. I don't know. As much as trafficking fentanyl is trafficking in people's deaths, that is true. A life sentence for a first-time offense? That's extreme. It is extreme, but it's an extreme problem. So radical the policy is, so radical the scope of the fentanyl crisis is also. What do you think? 1-833-668-2577. We'll stop here a little bit early. We'll get to some calls on the other side. We have 2 hours to debate this today. Phone lines are filling up. I'm David Smith. It's Talkback on News Radio.
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here in for Rob Snow today. Pierre Poilievre says anyone caught trafficking fentanyl should have a mandatory life sentence. What do you think about that policy proposal from the Conservative Party leader? To the phones we go. Up first today, it's Rudy in Cambridge. Hello, Rudy. You're on the air.
Yes, good day, David. The first offense thing, like you say, that's extreme, definitely extreme. Is it really going to help, though? Look at the countries where they have the death penalty for murder or just the death penalty for certain things. It hasn't helped. There's a lot of countries, looking in the States, they're still killing people in certain states where they have the death penalty. But I agree, yeah, something extreme has to be done. The first-time offense, no, you can't put somebody in life for first-time offense. But, yeah, it has to be a heavy charge for sure.
So you like the idea, specifics aside, of sending a strong message through law enforcement, through changing the criminal code, that trafficking in fentanyl should be treated differently than trafficking in other drugs?
Yeah, I believe so, because that's where all the overdoses are coming from. So, yeah, something else should be done besides the normal charges.
Okay. Thank you, Rudy. Thank you for the call.
Great. Have a good day.
Thank you. 1-833-668-2577. Just like that. Call in, have your say on the air. Curious to hear what people think about this. Fred in Calgary. Hello, Fred.
Hi, actually, I'm really agree with the previous caller. So, the rules should be really, really tougher, right? To just put him in the cage for life, it doesn't do anything. My tax, your tax, my hardworking tax is going to go toward to keeping them in the cage. Are they going to learn the lesson? No. They're like a mushroom. You put one, another one grow. You put one, another one grow. It should be a proper and tougher rule and law in effect. So it doesn't matter Poilievre going to bring it or others. It should be a tougher, rules and regulations should be placed. Otherwise, they're like a mushroom. You cut one, another one grow 2 feet away. That's what I believe.
Okay, I'm having trouble understanding where you stand on this then, Fred. So you think that they should be tougher, but not necessarily an automatic life sentence? Is that what you mean?
That's right. Exactly. Okay. That's what I mean. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Fred. I appreciate that.
I love your show. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you for that. I appreciate that, Fred. Thank you. Andre in Kitchener. Hello, Andre.
Good afternoon, David.
What do you think about what Poilievre is saying here? Mandatory life sentence.
Well, the reason I'm calling is I heard it before. Sanction has to be tougher because of where we're at now in time of life. It's not like back in the days when it was all about fun. I used to steal a lot of cars, and I got bailed out so many times it was a joke. And then I got 3 months, 6 months, a year, 3 years. And that was a waste. I look at this, and then it was a waste of my life. And the sanction changed myself, and I looked myself in the mirror. Now, I remember when crack came out, and when I was in the pen, people were coming in crazy for crack because the system had enough of it. Now, with fentanyl, the system it's overload, and I do believe that if you whack something like a 10-year, and also it's considered violent, so you're not eligible for half of your parole. You got to do your at least 3/4. So I do agree with a harder sanction. But one last comment on this, David, and I think it's very important too, and we've been neglected, is drinking driving. I think that should be the same thing too, a harder sanction.
Okay. So again, interesting. First three callers, maybe not a life sentence, but it should be stronger than the penalties for trafficking other kinds of drugs that are less deadly.
Exactly. And just like in the States is a harder penalty, and that's why I never committed crime in the States, and I always did it here. But that was 25 years ago, and that's realistic. It is harder over there when you get caught with cocaine than it is here. So here now in Canada, because of what's happening, terror and all that, so if we're more responsible, more mature about the problems that we have, hopefully they can do the same thing with the guns and immigration, all that stuff, and hopefully we can all fix this.
Okay, thank you, Andre.
You have a good day, David.
It's Andre in Kitchener. Virginia in Edmonton before we break. Hi, Virginia.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. What do you think of a mandatory life sentence for anyone involved in the trafficking, production, and distribution of fentanyl?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
And the reason why I say that is because the fentanyl is very dangerous. You don't need very much to overdose, about the size of 2 grains of salt, and you're dead. And my niece would be alive today if this stuff wasn't on the streets. And I'm being very serious. This stuff is deadly. And these people that are trafficking this stuff just to get money, they're inhumane. And the harder you bring down your fist on this stuff, the faster it's going to get cleaned up. And absolutely, there shouldn't be any drugs on the street. It's all about money. They don't care about people.
Yeah.
Once you're dead with fentanyl, you're dead. You're not coming back. It kills you. You're brain dead.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's where I'm at with this. Yes, bring the hammer down, lock them down. And you need a life sentence, 25 years, 30 years. You might get out in 15 years on good behavior.
Yeah.
Do your time, what have you. But yes, bring the hammer down on this and lock them up.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry for your loss, Virginia. Thank you. Appreciate the call today. And we have gotten to a point with this crisis. It's almost like cancer. I don't know how many people out there don't have a story about the opioid crisis. I think it's touched just about everybody in some way or another. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. It's Talkback. We'll stop here. We have 2 hours to take your calls. Hang on the line. We're back after this on News Radio.
Hello. 1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Getting tough on drug traffickers to combat the drug crisis in Canada. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is pitching a new policy. If he is elected Prime Minister, he says people caught trafficking in fentanyl should have a mandatory life sentence, 25 years in Canada, life sentence. Would you support or oppose that? 1-833-668-2577. Back to the phones. Cal is in Calgary today. Hi, Cal. You're on the air.
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm fine. What do you think of this idea?
You know what? I'm all for it. The reason why I say this is, a couple of years ago, I actually used to traffic it. And I'll tell you this right now, man. The penalties aren't harsh enough. My co-accusers, we all got 3 years.
Yeah.
All my co-accusers were out in 6 months. None of them turned the life around. Thankfully, I did, I got good supporting parents. I got a supporting family. And seeing how it broke them when I got sentenced really made me wake up. But just one thing I learned in the drug game is no one really sells heroin in Calgary because of the sentencing. It's 25 years for heroin. So.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay. So it's actually less. It's less for fentanyl.
It's way less for fentanyl. So when I started off with my charges, they were looking at giving me 7 years. And then because one of my co-accusers who only sold one pill, he took a 3-year deal just so he can go start his sentence and come out and get married and, all that stuff. I fought it for 3 years. I tried really hard, and in the end they're like, listen, we're not going to give you anything less than 3 because Buddy took 3. And while I was in there, I met a guy that got 2 years plus a day. So that will makes him eligible for federal time.
Yeah.
And then he was out in 6 months, and he got day home parole.
Yeah.
So instead of going to a halfway house, he just goes straight home. And then for me, I had to do the halfway house for day parole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was, he got full parole, day parole, and all of it almost instantly. I'm not going to say it's because he was white and I was Arab, and we're not going to bring that up, but I think there definitely needs to be harsher sentences, and they really need to crack down on it, and not just on that, but on the shooting as well. I had one of my cousins, man. He had 11 attempted murders, and he got 7 years, and he was out probably a couple months after me. What are you
doing these days, Cal?
I'm a barbershop owner. I own a barbershop in the southwest of Calgary, 37th Street Barbershop. I've worked there for almost 6 years, and, I've turned my life around. I started off with one employee, and now I'm at 6. I have my wife and my son. I have a 20-month-old. So,
Congratulations, Cal. Good for you.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it, my man.
Thank you for the
Thank
call
you for
today.
taking the talk. Take care.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Wow, what a story. What a story. But he credits his family, his support system, not the justice system, for helping him turn his life around. His compatriots, some of them went right back to it. So there's somebody who committed the crime, paid his debt to society, and says it wasn't enough. That's remarkable. So far, I've taken 5 calls on this. 2 people have said they don't support it. 3 people have said they do. A mandatory life sentence for trafficking in fentanyl. It is extreme, but so is the extent and the severity of the crisis. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow. We have 2 hours to take calls here on the show today. Everybody hang on. Thank you for being patient. We're coming up to the bottom of the hour. The latest breaking news is next, and then we'll be back on the phones here on Talk Back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
I'm David Smith in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. Talking about the fentanyl crisis, the opioid crisis, epidemic. Serious topic. Does relate back to Donald Trump and the tariff threat, of course, but today I want to talk more specifically about Canada's own domestic response to the drug crisis, separate from what's going on with tensions with the United States. Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre announced yesterday, if he becomes prime minister, he will impose a mandatory life sentence on anyone involved in trafficking, production, and distribution of over 40 milligrams of fentanyl. 40 milligrams is very small, physically. But this drug is so powerful that if somebody who has never used an opiate before were to take only a few milligrams, it could be fatal. So with 40 milligrams, you have enough fentanyl to kill several people if they are not accustomed to the drug. That's where Pierre Poilievre is coming at it from. He says trafficking in fentanyl is like shooting into a crowd. You're going to kill somebody, you just don't know who. So he thinks a mandatory life sentence is appropriate for that crime. Do you agree with that? Back to the phones. Thank you for waiting. Steve in Calgary. Hi, Steve.
Okay, so in the last 9 years, 50,000 Canadians have died from fentanyl.
That's right.
So I don't know any other drug that has that kind of lethal rate. I figure there wouldn't be a couple hundred people selling it in Canada. There's got to be a couple thousand. But let's say it's 2,000, and it's a number I just pulled out of the air.
Sure.
That would be 25 deaths. There would be each person would be responsible for 25 deaths. No serial killer has ever had 25 deaths on his jacket. So they're each literally, if you have 2,000, they're all serial killers if you look at it that way. Plus, you have the added bonus that every emergency responder is at serious risk if they come upon this and don't realize what they're dealing with. So when he says there should be a 25-year, I don't even think that's enough. How you get these people to curb their ways in life, you can't. But what you can do is that when they get caught, they're going to pay dearly for it. So I'd say yes, Poilievre is correct on this one.
Okay.
Anyways, my thoughts.
Okay, Steve, thank you. Thank you. Very well thought out. Yeah, and I think that would be the math that Pierre Poilievre is looking at. Right? When you have a substance that is this deadly, this fatal, should it be covered by the same laws that cover other, I guess you could say, more traditional hard drugs that we all knew before fentanyl came about, cocaine, methamphetamine, what have you. Those things are not nearly as fatal as fentanyl, so why should they be treated the same way? I can definitely see the logic in that argument. Keith in Nova Scotia, you're on the air. Hi, Keith.
Hi, David. How are you today?
I'm fine. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, I'll just congratulations to your caller who has turned his life around. I'll say that first. That's pretty commendable.
Yeah.
The other thing, I sort of I've lost 3 friends from high school. They were all gone before their 25th birthday. 2 were murdered and 1 suicide, all drug related.
Okay.
So that being said, I'm kind of like have mixed feelings about this because on one side of me says I don't care what happens to them, and on the other hand, if you were to have a relative or a son or maybe a daughter that got caught trafficking fentanyl over 40 milligrams, that would be a hard pill to swallow, knowing that they're going to go to jail for life.
Yeah. If it's a first offense, if it's an 18-year-old first offense, 25 years, right?
So yeah, their life is, well, I know people that they poison, their lives are over. So, like I said, it's for me to say that, just right away think that life is what they should get. If you had people that in your family that got that, I mean, would you maybe you would think differently about it? So I'm just thinking that there needs to be absolutely stiffer penalties, but then you put people away for life, then that's going to cost a lot of money to have them in jail, incarcerated for life. That runs into a lot of money people have to pay in taxes. So it's a hard one to really, sort it out, but there definitely needs to be some kind of a message sent, to people that want to traffic in that poison. And but what time to give them? A life just seems a little bit kind of over the top. As much as I said before that I don't care what happens to them because I've lost friends. So what do you think? That's pretty much what my thoughts are.
Yeah, and you're not sure, Keith. I think you're not sure. So I'm going to add a third category, and it's not sure. And I'll put you down over there, and I'm sure some more people will be joining you as we make our way through the program.
I don't know, but
because it's and I am in no way saying this is a black and white question. I am in no way saying that this should be an easy question to answer. But I think it's important that we talk about it, right?
Yeah, that's kind of like my feelings. Not an easy one, but anyway, I appreciate the call.
I appreciate you calling in, Keith. Thank you very much. Sorry, that's Keith in Halifax. I'll add not sure. I will add not sure as an answer. Support, oppose, on the fence, not sure. Because I think what Keith is saying, and I have landed with Keith on that one for sure, he can get behind the idea of sending a message. What this would do, certainly, and unambiguously, is this would send a message. But it is extreme. 1-833-668-2577. I'm David Smith. Back to the phones in a couple of minutes. A short break now. This is Talk Back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. Thank you for joining us. It's Talk Back on News Radio, and we're talking about the opioid crisis, drug crisis, addictions crisis in this country. Pierre Poilievre says that if he becomes the prime minister, he will impose, and I quote, mandatory life sentences on anyone involved in the trafficking, production, and distribution of over 40 milligrams of fentanyl, end quote. Do you agree or disagree with that? Next on the phones, we have Afif in Waterloo. Hi, Afif.
Hey, David, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this.
I was about to say, he should, they should have, mandatory sentences, the extra mandatory sentences, but even, harsher, because, in U.S., if somebody does, somebody kills somebody, they get a death penalty, right?
That's right,
so,
yeah.
This is kind of like you're going in and you're killing everybody, and so I think that even harsher penalty should be capital punishment, but we don't have it in Canada. So.
We don't. The harshest penalty that we have in Canada is a life sentence, which in Canada is 25 years. But you would be okay with that.
Yeah, I would be okay with that. But when I listened to the last guy and he's like, "Oh, it's going to cost all the taxpayers," then I was like,
"Yep."
Now I'm not sure.
Yes, but on the that's a fair, it's a fair comment. But on the other side of things too, I mean, the health crisis is also costing millions, hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of dollars every year.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's killing a lot of people. Especially in Ontario, because I'm involved in Ontario, they're doing a lot of that. Like if you heard Doug Ford and all the people that are shooting up and then they're also killing people. So
yep.
It's really bad.
Yeah. So you think it's time to toughen these laws, to get tougher on this crime? Sure. Okay. Thank you, Afif. Thank you for weighing in. Appreciate that. Up next is Dave in Halifax. Dave, hello, you're on the air.
Hi, David. Thanks for taking my call. Give me a yes for Pierre Poilievre. I think we got to have some gusto here to eliminate it. But I think it's a deterrent, life sentence, 25 years. You had a great caller on, and that's why I love radio. He was just a terrific caller. He's been there, done that. And he said, I think in Calgary, where it was a stiffer penalty, was a deterrent for the pushers. Yeah. And if nothing else, 25 years is a deterrent. Now, I think folks should look, and we can thank Trump for this. I mean, shame on our country to have allowed this rot to continue. I mean, you've had callers, many, that have, and families, people who have been affected by this, who have been touched by this. If you've been around somebody who's been through this, and there's no coming back with fentanyl. I really don't think there is, for the most part. And I can tell you, you go into the cities that are rotting at the core, Vancouver, and most of the big cities. You just go on YouTube, and I don't recommend people to dwell on horrible things, but just take a look at the inner cores of our cities with the homeless, the fentanyl users. And I was out in Vancouver, which was my own stomping grounds at one time. East Hastings, there's about 4 blocks of I call them the Walking Dead, David. They're like zombies, and to see where these folks, they're bent over, it's just unbelievable. And to allow our society to rot like we are, shame on us, and I know there's not a lot of funds and money to try to rehabilitate these folks. And I think BC went through the progressive way of just allowing, David, you might know him better than me, the decriminalization of drugs. And it's not working. I mean, you're taking 7 people off the streets every night dead, maybe even more now. And it's even worse in the U.S. cities. So I applaud Trump for this. From chaos, sometimes there's a silver lining. And it's gotten our butts in gear to actually recognize the disease, the plague that is plaguing our cities. And it could be a deliberate thing. We've got to get to the source, to the ingredients from where these things are coming. And I have no problem with securing our borders more and helping in this situation, because it's a very bad situation. So give me an absolute yes. They know when you're dealing with this stuff and pushing it, you're going to be punished hard. And I like that idea, quite frankly.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Thank you for weighing in today. I appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you, David.
And Dave is correct. In BC, they had a decriminalization pilot project. It was slated to run for 5 years. They ended it early. The federal government had to authorize them to do that. In Canada, the criminal code, criminal justice is all federal jurisdiction. So the province of BC applied to the federal government asking, can we pilot a policy where you provide us with an exemption to the criminal code of Canada so it will no longer be illegal to possess and use these drugs in our province? And they did that. And it ran for, I think, 4 years, 3 or 4 years through the pandemic, and they ultimately reversed course. They had all kinds of problems with it, and at the end of the day, the number of overdoses was not decreasing. There is an argument to be made that the rate of overdoses would have increased faster had it not been for that policy. It's a chicken and egg argument. I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole. We've done separate shows on harm reduction and decriminalization. I want to keep it focused today, but that's the background for Dave in Halifax and for other people who are curious about how that shook out in British Columbia. We have to stop here. We'll get back to the phones in a couple of minutes. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. This is Talk Back, and you are listening to News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Gathering your opinions on Pierre Poilievre's proposal. If he becomes prime minister, the Conservative Party leader says he will bring in mandatory life sentences for fentanyl trafficking. He says it's simply too big a problem. It is too deadly. The laws we have on the books are not adequate. What do you think of that? An automatic life sentence for trafficking in fentanyl. Since 2016, 49,000 Canadians have died of overdoses. 9 out of 10 were due to fentanyl specifically. Up next on the phones, Brian in Halifax. Thank you for waiting, Brian. You're on the air.
No problem. Put me down as a no but.
Okay. Why is that?
So the but is I agree with stiffening the sentences, right? But I don't agree with mandatory life sentences, especially first times. And there's a number of reasons why. Number one, unlike what the other guy from Halifax said, we know really sentencing isn't really that much of a deterrent. Because if it was, then all the life sentences we give out now for different crimes would have been, we have so much less. But that's not really how it works. I mean, the justice system as we have it now is mostly a punishment and get them off the street kind of thing, which, let's be fair, for a lot of people, just getting them off the street is great. It's absolutely true that the fentanyl sentencing is ridiculously low, right? But the thing is, as well, when you make things mandatory, sentencing mandatory, we know because down in California, when they had the 3 strikes rule, once the guys, they're on their 3rd strike. And so if they get arrested, they're going to go away for a very long time. I think it was, 15, 20 years or something like that for the 3rd strike back then?
Something like that. Yeah, something like that.
You had a proliferation of people like, well, if I'm going away for a long time, better make it count.
Yeah.
If I'm going to get a life sentence anyway for having this tiny amount of fentanyl, well, shit, I better. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear.
That's okay.
Things are going to be worse for that, right? When you have that mandatory sentence. And I guess it all comes down to what do you view the purpose of our justice system is. I personally think that we should be focused more on the whole idea of corrections, because that's what we call it. But we don't do that. We don't do enough of that. And you really, really, just throwing people in jail doesn't work. It doesn't fix the vast majority of people. And that the guy from Calgary that you had on that had gone to jail for trafficking fentanyl, again, powerful story, and absolutely agree with him that we need to strengthen these rules. But, like you said, if he's not counting on the justice system for being something that helped him get over it, and it was just his family, that's wrong. That's a bad part of our justice system. Because when you give people no options, when you give people no way out, they're not going to take the way out. The fentanyl gets them so much money now that whatever, and if people are in that desperate a situation that trafficking drugs immediately is a bad thing.
I hear you, Brian. I have to jump in. We're going to get cut off in 10 seconds.
No problem.
Great thoughts today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And again, the 4-letter words, let's be careful. I know they slip out sometimes. Just watch that.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
And welcome back to the show. Second hour of Talk Back on News Radio. I am David Smith. I'm filling in for Rob today. If you're just joining us, we're talking about an announcement that the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre made yesterday concerning the fentanyl crisis. Poilievre says under his government, he would bring in mandatory life sentences for trafficking fentanyl. That is extreme. But so is the fentanyl crisis. So we're getting your opinions, gathering your thoughts on that idea. Back to the phones. It's been very busy today. Let's keep it going. Kevin in Red Deer. Thank you for waiting, Kevin. You're on the air.
How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for hanging in there. I know the waits are a little longer than normal today, but it's a meaty topic. So please, Kevin, have your say.
No worries. I'll be quick. The only thing that bothers me is calling it a first offense.
Okay.
It's their first time getting caught.
Okay. So if it was second offense and onwards, you would have no problem with it.
I have no problem locking it up because I've seen raids and busts in my area, where I live. The next day they come in, they're walking the streets. Sometimes they'll have an ankle monitor on and sometimes they don't. You read the papers that they found firearms, cocaine, meth, and they're out the next day. It's a revolving door. We got to curb it. What we're doing right now isn't working.
Okay, thank you for having your say, Kevin. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's Kevin in Red Deer. Up next is Michael in Calgary. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you today? What's your opinion on this?
First of all, that caller that had a story that was a really awesome story. I wish he would go to the newspaper or somewhere and be interviewed so that story can actually be like everybody would know about that story, like across Canada. Like that's an awesome story. Great deal. Second of all, I would say that Justin Trudeau, trust fund baby, and his minions have destroyed this country. So Pierre Poilievre basically has to do, he's the opposition leader. So I believe what he's saying it makes sense. And also the ones that are caught and they're not Canadian citizens should be deported right on the spot.
So this idea that we are just being too lenient on this issue, it's far too serious, and we need to get tougher on the traffickers of this deadly drug. You are totally on board with that message.
I am totally on board. I just read an article. I think it was in Edmonton. They seized $400,000 worth of fentanyl, guns, and swords. This was in Edmonton. This was on the.
Yes, I read about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's swords. Who has swords nowadays? Anyway, sorry, but yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you for weighing in, Michael. I appreciate that.
No problem. Take care.
That's Michael in Calgary. Staying in Calgary, up next is Mike. From Michael to Mike in Calgary. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, I agree with the previous caller. I also think that perhaps those who manufacture the stuff should be labeled as a dangerous offender because it is akin to murdering people, basically. That's what it's all about, and getting money.
So you're okay with it, even mandatory. The word Pierre Poilievre uses is mandatory. That's not too far for you.
No, I don't think that's too far at all. And being labeled as a dangerous offender also puts him on the world watch as well. So that might be something to consider. It's ridiculous that we have these problems in our modern times with poisonous drugs on the street. So
okay,
and these people are knowingly producing this stuff and willing to sell it, and They take absolutely zero responsibility for themselves and for anybody else around them. They're a public endangerment, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, so lock them up, get them off the street.
Yeah, or deport them if necessary.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for weighing in, Mike. Thank you. Appreciate it. It is an extreme proposal, but so is what we're doing. What we're doing is not working. This crisis is not being addressed at a fundamental level. It's just not. We're just living with it. We're just living with it. So I was looking it up this morning, just if anyone's curious. As it stands, you can already receive a life sentence in prison for trafficking hard drugs in Canada. That's the maximum penalty. Schedule 1 or 2 drugs, so the ones you typically think about, crack, cocaine, methamphetamine, LSD, heroin, and fentanyl as well is already a Schedule 1 drug. So you can receive a life sentence for trafficking fentanyl, but it's not automatic. There's no mandatory minimum sentence for drug trafficking in Canada. And based on my perusal of some law blogs and resources this morning, I can tell you that the sentences for drug trafficking in Canada are typically much shorter than 25 years. For most provinces, trafficking in hard drugs will typically land you a sentence of 3 to 5. For a low-level dealer, for a high-level dealer, multiple kilograms, you're looking at 5 to 10. But it does vary widely from province to province. And of course, based on the circumstances of the individual cases, there can be aggravating factors and mitigating factors as well. We'll take one more call before we stop. It's AJ in Calgary. Hi, AJ. You're on the air.
Hello.
Do you agree or disagree with this?
I agree with the mandatory sentence. I agree with it on the second offense.
Okay.
On the first, maybe it's a little harsh. I've got a stepson. His life was taken from him. He was in his mid-30s due to those poisonous chemicals.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they do it right now in courts, but they should have like victim impact statements too. Like maybe they should go around and film all the relatives of the overdose victims.
Yeah.
And make the dealers watch what they're doing to other people's lives through the selling of this poison.
Yeah, I would definitely support that if they wanted to start doing that as a practice in the courtroom. You're right. I think that would be very impactful. So on the whole, I mean, so mandatory, a few people are taking issue with this idea that it's automatic mandatory on a first offense, but the concept, sending a message, toughening up these laws, you're fully on board with that, AJ?
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
It's like a disease. It's like cancer, right?
Yeah.
It's a big industry, and people are profiting off other people's suffering. And it's not necessarily only the person whose life's been taken, but the people that, love them, that raised them and whatnot, the parents, the wives and husbands of whose lives were taken, they're impacted as well. So, yeah, let's lock them up.
Okay, thank you, AJ. Thank you for sharing your story today. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Take care. That's AJ in Calgary. I am David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. We'll stop here for a short break. One phone line is available now. 1-833-668-2577 is the number to call to weigh in on this. We'll be back right after this break. We'll keep going till the end of this hour. Lots of time to take your calls. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
I'm David Smith, filling in for Rob today. We're having a discussion about the fentanyl crisis and law enforcement getting tough on trafficking of fentanyl in this country. In Canada, judges have a lot of discretion when sentencing drug dealers Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre would like to remove some of that discretion only when it comes to fentanyl. He wants a mandatory life sentence for trafficking in fentanyl. Would you support or oppose that idea? Up next on the phones, we have Peter in Halifax. Hello, Peter.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Frankly, I believe that the harsh sentences should be used as a club so that you work your way up the chain until you get to the money launderers. So that would be the banks. I mean, you do know that TD Bank just took a $4 billion hit in the state for money laundering.
Yep.
And so none of this could even be possible. No one would do it if the stacks and pallets of 20s and 100s weren't being laundered. The bankers and the real estate people who are laundering the money should be hung in public.
Okay, come on, Peter. What are you talking about? Public execution? Are you being serious right now? You just advocated for a public execution on the radio? Are you kidding me? Trying to have a serious discussion here. No, I'm not going to tolerate a suggestion of public executions on my radio show. Goodbye, Peter. Zoltan in Cambridge, hello.
How the heck are you?
I'm fine. What is your opinion on this?
Public executions are not so good.
No.
I fought in Vietnam for 4 years. I'm American.
No, that was an absurd comment from that previous caller. I'd like to be serious today. So we're talking about a serious policy proposal.
I completely disagree with Poilievre.
Okay, you disagree with Poilievre. Please tell me why.
Yes, I do. When the person who sells fentanyl, first time, no time.
Okay.
As soon as they are convicted, they should go straight to the pen, and they should go straight and get. They should get killed. They are killers, these people.
Yeah, well, we don't have capital punishment in this country, so the maximum sentence is 25 years.
Time has changed, perhaps. You should think about it. Should I pay and should you pay 25 years for this person to be housed, to be fed, to be guarded?
I believe yes. Why? I do not support capital punishment, and I think that debate is long over in this country. But nonetheless, do you think, Zoltan, that the consequences for trafficking in fentanyl, if it's a lighter sentence than 25 years, is that too lenient?
Oh, way too lenient. The people that sell these things know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what they're perpetrating. They know exactly how they are killing. And what do we do about it? Absolutely nothing. 25 years is nothing in Canada.
Okay, you say it's nothing. It is the most severe penalty that we have under law in this country, so it sounds like you would be okay with that, but not on a first offense basis.
First offense? I think they should be killed.
Okay, thank you, Zoltan. All right, so, I'm going to try to read between the lines with what that caller was saying. Sounds like he would be in support of that. Again, we're coming at this from a serious perspective. We're not talking about fantasy land where Canada has suddenly gone back in time 100 years and we have capital punishment again. That debate has been settled in this country. What we do have is a serious proposal from the man who would be prime minister in Pierre Poilievre. He says mandatory 25-year sentence for trafficking in fentanyl. A lot of callers have taken issue with the word mandatory, but far fewer have taken issue with the life sentence component. I find that interesting. Wayne in Calgary, you're on the air, sir. What do you have to say?
Good morning, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Good. Please go ahead.
Good. So I'm 100% in favor of the minimum 25-year mandatory sentence. To answer the question in short form, remember we are dealing here with the dealers, and they are fully aware of what they're doing. And in fact, I believe when they're charged with their drug charges, they should also have an attempted murder charge added to that, knowing what fentanyl can do to the community. Now, there's been several people comment on the cost of keeping people in prison. However, The city of Vancouver says it costs them $55,000 per homeless person. And entering these kids from high school into the fentanyl game and getting them hooked on it, they end up landing up on the street, whether it's in Vancouver, Toronto, or wherever, right? So housing these people in jail. And I also would comment on the one guy's comment that they're like mushrooms and that they'll just replace themselves. That is true to some extent, but at some point in time, that particular individual who may have caused my next child's death is in jail, and he's not dealing. So we deal with each dealer one at a time. I don't think the sentence can be too harsh.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you for the thoughtful comments today. I appreciate that.
You bet. Thanks, David.
We have to stop here. We'll get back to the phones in a couple of minutes. I'm David Smith, filling in for Rob Snow today. This is Talkback. One line is available, 1-833-668-2577. You're listening to News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
David Smith here in for Rob today. If you're just tuning in, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre says there should be a mandatory life sentence for trafficking fentanyl in this country. I want to know if you agree or disagree with that. Back to the phones. It's Siva in Calgary. Hi, Siva. You're on the air.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. What do you have to say about this?
I'm okay with this mandatory sentencing, but I'm not okay with that 40 milligram cutoff. It has to be more. The threshold has to be a little bit higher because there are a lot of things that ordinary people, they do not understand. People are just angry, and it's just a knee-jerk reaction, just like, end fossil fuels. Those guys say end fossil fuel, and then what? Climate change will stop? No. The same thing. If you just put mandatory sentences, it's not just, the tap is turned on and there is no more fentanyl in the market and there is no more death. No, that's not going to happen now. If you put a mandatory sentencing with such a low threshold like this 40 milligram, what you will be doing, you will be just catching all the small fishes and you will be just filling the prison. And the prosecutors will not have any leverage against these people because the sentencing is now mandatory, because sometimes they do plea bargain. And in plea bargain, the expectation is that they give information so that it leads to the bigger catch, to the bigger guys, right?
Okay.
My thing is mandatory sentencing. Yes, we should do something about this. The sentencing, but we should trust in our judges also. But sometimes they are lenient, liberal, and blah blah, and all those accusations, right? So mandatory sentencing is good, but the threshold 40 milligrams, please increase it so that we catch the big fish. We give that leverage to the prosecutors, and they use it in their negotiation with the small fish to lead us to catch the big fish, because ultimately that is what matters, right? Because whatever we do, we are going to have this fentanyl crisis. That is for sure. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Siva. I appreciate your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Yeah, the 40 milligram threshold, look, I think that Pierre Poilievre is a common sense guy. Even outside of a political slogan, I think he is driven by a common sense ideology. And I think he's trying to make a point with that threshold. And his point is, for the uninitiated user, for someone who is not actively addicted to opiates, it only takes 2 milligrams of fentanyl for a potentially fatal overdose. So I think that in his messaging there, he's trying to make a point about that. Whether or not that constitutes a serious policy proposal, well, we'll have to see. We're at a very early stage in this debate. I don't want to get too sidetracked on that. Still, the theme, as I've taken calls for the last hour and a half, most people are open to this. Most people are feeling like the laws we have in this country to punish traffickers of fentanyl are too lenient. We'll take more calls after the break. I'm David Smith. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
A mandatory life sentence for trafficking fentanyl? That's what the Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre is proposing. in response to the deadly drug crisis in this country. He thinks our laws are too lenient. What do you think? Back to the phones. Thank you for waiting. James in Calgary, you're on the air. James?
Hello?
Yes. Go ahead.
It got static when you went to my name. I didn't know you wanted my name. Hang on, I'm just pulling over off the side of the road so I can talk to you on my phone.
Yes, please be safe. We are big safety fans here on Talkback on News Radio.
You bet. So, I don't have an issue with 25-year mandatory sentences. My concern is a number of things, though. Does the person only have to serve one-third of the sentence and then he gets out, like most of the crimes in Canada? And time served waiting for trial, is that included as well? I don't know that the laws around 25-year mandatory life sentence, number one.
The bail provisions would be the same. So you would be eligible for bail and time served, all of that would still apply.
Yeah, so really, we'll be lucky if they serve 8 years in jail. Okay.
Still, 8 years would be better than 6 months, if you want to look at it that way.
I agree. I think the problem here is that it's a complex issue and trying to impose a simple solution. I mean, we have to look at the psychosocial causes of why people use fentanyl, whether it's recreational and, they get addicted, or they're hiding from some issues from their upbringing, or whether it's financial. I think we need to do research and treat the underlying causes as well as mandatory sentences. And secondly, I mean, if people are here from foreign countries, now I'm not trying to sound discriminatory, but they should be sent back to their countries. We don't need that kind of criminal element in this country. We got enough problems.
No, I support that. If you are here on a limited immigration status and you contravene those rules by breaking the law, then you have no right to be in this country.
No,
those are the rules. We have laws for reasons.
Yeah, and the thing is these people that are serious criminals about it, they'll still continue their criminal enterprise from jail. I mean,
yeah, that is another problem. Problem.
We need to look at all of it, and I think we also need to look at the fact that I don't know what products are used to make fentanyl, but maybe we need to red flag some of these products so we can start tracking what's going on.
Yeah, that is certainly a big part of the problem, and it's more complicated than some people may think.
Well, that's it.
The problem with the precursors, these chemical compounds are known as piperidines. That's what they're called. Piperidines. They are precursors to fentanyl. The problem is many of the same chemicals that you use to make fentanyl also are found in rubber and lipstick and all sorts of other legitimate consumer products. So if you outlaw them, you're going to upend all kinds of consumer businesses, right?
Well, not necessarily outlaw them, but they can red flag them so when people are purchasing products, they can track the people that are buying them. If it isn't a legitimate company making rubber or making lipstick,
right?
What the heck are they using it for?
Right.
And let's start following it.
Okay. All right. That's very interesting. I'll think on that. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So, like I said, it's a complex problem.
Yeah.
And mandatory sentences are it's like having the blinders on and just going after the traffickers. And rightfully so we should, but we also need to look at the underlying causes and how it's manufactured and red flag the products so that we can start tracking what's going on and where they're coming from and where they're going.
Okay. Yeah. Good thoughts today, James. Thank you.
You bet. Bye for now.
That's James in Calgary. Up next is John in Calgary. Hi, John. You're on the air.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on. I have a contrary view on some of these points, but I've got a couple of points for you. Firstly, Poilievre is wrong to get involved in judicial matters. It's not for a politician to set limits, and I think it has a chance of making it worse. Where you have a mandatory limit, it takes the controls off that person having any concern or care about what they're actually doing. So I think mandatory sentences, the whole life sentences, are fundamentally wrong, which is why you don't see them for other crimes or other terrible crimes. We could talk more about that, but the easier control is money laundering. And I don't know if your listeners know how easy money laundering really is, but it's quite simple.
Yeah.
And it happens every single day. The easier and quicker control is to control the money, because this is all money-based. But to answer your underlying question, whole life sentences, probably a bad idea.
Because of the arbitrary factor. I think that you have a problem with the undermining of judicial independence.
Yeah, but let's imagine this. Let's imagine you gave everybody a whole life sentence for robbing a bank.
Yeah.
Let's say that was a thing. Well, next time I'll rob the bank, but I'll shoot everybody in it, because I'm still going to get a whole life sentence. I can actually make the situation much more worse for everybody, because I know I've already met the threshold for the sentence limit. And so you're going to create a situation where the people that are doing this, these awful humans, are probably going to care even less, and you'll see more deaths. So whilst you may wish this to have a positive impact, there's a very high likelihood it would have exactly the opposite.
Yeah, that is the other side of the coin. It could backfire. You could end up making things worse. If you look at it from that perspective.
Just in case people don't know, you could go to a casino any night of the week, walk in with cash, lose 50% of it, go to the counter with your chips, be seen on camera collecting new money, it's laundered, 50% rate. We could easily control things like that. Don't mean no disrespect for casinos, but easily control things like that much tighter. As soon as the money supply goes out of anything, suddenly people lose interest.
Yeah, if you're going to beef up a law, take a look at the financial side of it, not the retail side of it. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, John. Appreciate the call today.
Thanks. Bye.
We'll stop here. About 19 minutes left in the hour. 3 callers on the line. Hang on. I will get to everyone before the top of the hour, before we are done for the day. I am David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. This is Talk Back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Pierre Poilievre says we need to get serious and get tough about fentanyl trafficking in this country. Poilievre announced yesterday if he becomes prime minister, he will bring in a mandatory life sentence for anyone caught trafficking fentanyl. Not people using the fentanyl. He referred to them as the victims. He's talking about people trafficking it, profiting off of it, producing it, and selling it. Back to the phones. Tom in Cambridge, thank you for waiting. What's your opinion on this?
Well, I think if you're going to do this, I think we're being very short-sighted. There's a lot of illegal drugs that enter Canada, and we're just going to focus on one. We're letting ourselves back open again for something else to come back into the country again. So if you're going to do this, you include fentanyl, you include oxycodone, you include heroin, you include cocaine, you include methamphetamines. Anyone of an illegal organization who is distributing and manufacturing those drugs in Canada or outside should be charged to a mandatory maximum sentence, not just one. And that's my common sense approach, is that, well, we're just going to focus on fentanyl. What are you going to do with the heroin? What are you going to do with the cocaine?
Okay, a couple things on that, Tom. From what I understand, the actual heroin trade has more or less disappeared because of fentanyl. Because it's so much easier to produce, it's so much more powerful, it's just taken over the drug supply, point number one. Point number two, and I think this is what Poilievre is getting at, is fentanyl is multiple times more deadly than any of those other drugs, so it should be treated separately. I think that's what he's getting at.
Well, you could still blanket the other ones under that policy, could you not? Whether it's dropped off or not dropped off, why not put them under that same policy? Because then if you start reducing fentanyl, what are people going to go back on?
Yeah. Okay.
Come on now. Let's use some common sense here. Is that if we're going to do this, and if you don't acknowledge the other things that are still going on here, they're just going to crop back up again. So you're going to be a dog chasing its tail. So anyway, you're going to implement another mandatory sentence like for cocaine individually for each one? No, you put it under one umbrella. And if you have to make the umbrella bigger, you make the umbrella bigger. And if you got to make the sentence stronger, you make the sentence stronger. If you have to say those to the age of 17 and up will serve a mandatory sentence, then that's where you start. The other side is that the reason why we have a lot of this going on is that somehow or another, crime has been glorified over the years, and the money you can make doing things illegally. So what else does someone have to go to than to commit crime and sell illegal drugs, that to make the money that they feel the life they deserve to fund that type of lifestyle? And again, the other side, there's consequences here, and we have not made any consequences severe enough for anybody as a deterrent for them not to do anything as this. So there's a lot of things involved here, and if we're going to do it, do it. And for the last thing here, the Trump fund baby that everybody likes to call him, he was the guy who legalized marijuana. And for the longest time, if you went across the border in the United States and you're found to have a couple of joints in your possession, and you were charged, you served a sentence longer than those committing sexual crimes or robbing a bank. So let's sort of just put things in perspective here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for your thoughts. Want to move along? Because Kyla has been waiting for a while. Kyla in Calgary. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. So I'm a bit on the fence about it just because it is hard to know the effectiveness of, a 25-year sentence. But I do feel it sends a very clear message to people that are involved in the possession and distribution of fentanyl. There was just a case in Alberta where he was involved in a fairly large fentanyl ring, and he was charged 16 years. And so, what is the impact of that? We don't know, but you'd like to think that it does send a very clear message. But also tying into one of the other callers, and he mentioned that the charge could actually even be changed to something along the lines of, attempted murder or manslaughter, because at the end of the day, anybody that is involved with fentanyl, with the possession, the creation, the distribution of fentanyl, they knowingly are aware of the fact that they're distributing a poison that has a high likelihood of killing someone. And so how is that not in some way attempted murder? How is that not in some way receiving, a harsher punishment or a harsher sentence? I understand the possession side of it, but I do feel that there's a secondary sentence at play here. Just when you look at the effects of fentanyl and how it does impact, like it's a public health crisis, even, if somebody comes onto the scene where fentanyl has been exposed, that puts anybody that is attending that scene at risk as well. And so I just feel there could be this other secondary sentence at play just because of the fact that these people are very aware of what they're distributing. They're very aware of the implications of distributing this to someone. And also, to add to that, a lot of people that have died, unfortunately, because of fentanyl have been unaware of the traces of fentanyl that might be in a substance that they think that they are just, consuming something else. And so I think that there's that aspect to it as well, that, a lot of these cases where people have died from a fentanyl overdose were completely unaware that there was fentanyl that was laced within the drug that they were consuming. And those people that distributed it to them were aware that there was fentanyl. And so, it's one of those things that, yes, I don't understand, the impact of having a mandatory 25-year sentence, but I'd like to think that it would send a clear message to other people that are in possession and distributing fentanyl.
Yeah, all very valid points, Kyla. Very well thought out today. Thank you for your call.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. Yeah. All valid points. The part of it that is appealing to me, and I think that most of the people who've called today agree with this, it's the sending of the message. It does send a clear message, and that's appealing. There's something to that. Whether or not this policy proposal from Poilievre is fully baked at this point, there's a kernel of it there in sending the message that's powerful. And I think people are relating to that and latching onto it. We'll stop here. We'll get to the rest of the calls before the top of the hour. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. This is Talk Back on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Time for one more quick call before the top of the hour on mandatory life sentences for trafficking fentanyl, which Pierre Poilievre is proposing as a policy if he becomes the prime minister. Clay in Calgary. Hi, Clay. You're on the air. What do you think?
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good.
I'm calling to talk about the impact that fentanyl has on families. And the problem with fentanyl is that it's a drug that most people don't really survive. You know, it's such a fatal, such a, terrible, death-invoking substance, that anything related to the trafficking and the distribution should be, I would say 25 years. I say why not more? I work with people in recovery, and there is miracles in recovery. There's miracles from addiction, myself included, and it's a drug that kind of takes away the possibility. If someone's in active addiction, those other drugs are something you can work with. But if you just die, I had a friend die last year from fentanyl, and
I'm sorry to hear
a
that.
Terrible drug.
Yeah. So increasing the penalty for trafficking, you're okay with that? You support that?
I would say increase the penalty for all drugs, but I mean, fentanyl at least, the people that are doing it, if they get caught, then they can go away for some time.
Okay, thank you very much, Clay, and thank you for your work in the recovery space.
Oh, yeah.
That's vital work that you do, and thank you for that.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you very much, Clay. That's all the time we have for calls today. A really great discussion on this issue. Such an important one, and thank you to everybody who has called today to voice your opinion on this. The majority of people who have called have been somewhat or totally in support of a mandatory life sentence, or at the very minimum, increasing the penalty for fentanyl specifically, because it sends a message. That's an interesting result after 2 hours of gathering your opinion on this issue. And I'll leave you with this. If there is one silver lining in Trump's tariff threat, maybe it's the fact that this issue has been brought back to the forefront of public discussion in Canada. Because it is totally out of control. And it ruins lives. And I, for one, feel totally helpless in the face of it. It's a tough problem to solve, but we shouldn't stop trying to solve it. I'm David Smith, in for Rob Snow today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for listening, for calling in. The latest breaking news is coming up next on News Radio.